Hello everyone, and welcome to the first virtual walking tour of Mexico City presented by the City.mx. I'm Andrea Ortegali, and today we're going to take a really quick walk down one of the most iconic streets in downtown Mexico City, Donceles streets. Now, for most Mexico City residents, the mention of the name means just one thing: used books. And there are still a lot of used book sellers on the street, from piles of old paperbacks ready for the pulp mill to dealers in out-of-print books, to specialists even in rare and antique manuscripts that could never be found anywhere else. But just as these books have found second and third and fourth lives, the street too has gone through multiple editions and reprintings. Even just a generation ago, it was also a center for dealers in photographic equipment, cameras, films, lenses, tripods. You can still see the remnants of that today too. As we're going to see, that's just the most recent version of the street that is really among the oldest in the city. Donceles Street runs from west to east from Eje Central, just behind Palacio de Bellas Artes, and then all the way down to República de Argentina. At that point, the street name changes, as they often do in the city, but that street, Calle Justo Sierra, probably deserves a video tour all on its own. Donceles Street was laid out by the Spaniard conquistadores already in 1524, just 3 years after the fall of Tenochtitlan, the former Aztec capital that eventually became Mexico City. The city's new masters reshaped the city in a much more European way, eventually replacing the canals and footpaths with the square grid that the Europeans had inherited from Alexander the Great. The name of the street alludes to a doncel, that's a Spanish word for a young nobleman, who may have either lived on the street or walked along it in order to catch a glimpse of the young noble women who resided there too. Along the street, one can find impressive buildings from almost as many architectural styles that there are in the city: the Baroque, the Neoclassical, the Eclectic that combines multiple styles, and modern buildings from much more recent years. Our first stop is at Donceles number 24, the Teatro Fru Fru. Founded way back in 1899, it was later refurbished and reopened as a venue for rather controversial theater works in the 1970s. Today, the Teatro Fru Fru is said to be one of the most haunted buildings in the city, and actors are said to pay a statue of the devil prior to their performances, lest they suffer his wrath. Our second stop is today the Palacio Legislativo of Mexico City. That's the legislative palace where the city laws are written and codified. The building is at the corner of Donceles and Allende streets, and can be clearly spotted because of the pediment on the facade and the Ionic columns, which were masterfully carved from quarried stone to conceal the iron structure of the building. It was one of the first buildings to have been built with this technique. Our third stop is an old one, the Hospital del Divino Salvador. A mental sanatorium for quote-unquote demented women, the building was finished by the Jesuits in the year 1700. It remained in operation until 1767, when the Jesuits were expelled from Spain and all of the colonies. It's one of the most beautiful Baroque buildings on the street. After that, we come to the Teatro de la Ciudad de México. Today's Mexico City Theater was remodeled and redesigned by a very famous actress of the time, Esperanza Iris. It reopened to the public in 1918 and it still bears her name. The renovations reshaped the building with a neoclassical facade and lots of Art Nouveau details that can be appreciated immediately in the glass entryway roof on the front and in the organic shapes on the window glazings and the ironwork. Today, it's still considered to be one of the primary artistic stages in the city and in the country. Next, we come up to the Palacio de los Condes de Eras y Soto. That's the palace of the Counts of Eras and Soto, named for its most famous inhabitants. The palace is a magnificent 18th century work of New Spanish Baroque. Today, the building houses the Historical Archive of Mexico City and, most famously, the head of the Angel of Independence that was knocked off the statue when it plunged to the ground during the earthquake of 1957. Just past the palace is the former Colegio de Cristo, today home to the Museo de la Caricatura, the Caricature Museum. It's an important museum, but most international visitors simply can't get over the magnificent building. It dates from 1612. By the mid-17th century, the College of San Pedro and San Pablo was merged with the bigger Colegio de San Isidoro, and this smaller building served as a residential hall for the colegios before and after the merger. Today, this masterpiece of a Baroque building houses the Caricature Museum, which is a good place to understand the role of satirical and political cartooning in 19th and 20th century Mexico. But it's also a great place to contemplate and indeed to appreciate Baroque residential architecture. Just a little further is the Templo de la Enseñanza, quite literally the teaching temple, built on the late 18th century. Inside, you'll also want to check out the altar paintings by a famous artist of the period named Andrés López. These depict the Assumption of Mary, the Virgin of the Apocalypse, and one most symbolic is a fresco of the vault, dedicated to the Virgin of the Pillar. It depicts the Virgin Mary appearing to Saint James the Apostle. In the 20th century, it was especially important to the members of the exile community who'd fled the Spanish Civil War of the 1930s. Toward the very end of the street is the Templo Mayor, the main temple of Tenochtitlan. As I hope you've seen, Donceles is loaded with important architectural and historical sites that make it an easy way to see a lot of Mexico City history in just the space of a few city blocks. Until you get here yourself, there's a lot to look at and to click on the app and website at thecity.mx. And if you'd like to know more, just drop us a line.